Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Good. We're going to revisit a little thing that went on here for months after months, and that is military aid to Ukraine.
Yeah.
You'd think we'd have settled all that, and the Russiagate thing is behind us. I'm not so sure that we're getting all involved in Russiagate again, but there's stuff in the news about Ukraine and getting more military aid. But before we go into that, I might just mention that this subject might not be as interesting to some of the viewers, or to the general public at least. Our viewers are always interested. But in the general public, you know, viruses, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, who's telling the truth about how dangerous this is? That's a big deal. And also the stock market and the combination and the challenge between, you know, a lot of Austrian economists. Matter of fact, if you're an Austrian economist, you'd have said, the bubble's been there for a long time, the bubble will burst. And now they're saying, well, the virus did it. The virus did it, which gets some people off the hook. The Fed gets off the hook. The president may get off the hook for all the spending and things going on. So that now we have this little bit of distraction. But you know, when I saw that announcement that they were getting ready to send more weaponry to Ukraine, my thought was that, well, you know, when things get tough at home, I think Clinton had a few episodes where things were tough with Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah.
And they said they had a bombing charade. I don't think, hopefully Trump's better than that, but you keep thinking that sometimes things are beyond his control. Other people will stir up trouble. And I thought, are they trying to stir up trouble for distraction and this sort of thing? Maybe, but I don't think that's the big deal. I think this is sort of the usual stuff, the usual process of foreign aid, and just think of all that Russiagate was over a process of how you give foreign aid and whether there's quid pro quo. Is there an advantage to it? Is it politicized? Like, no, it's not politicized. But here we go again, and they don't talk about, what are we giving all this money away for? And when we look at this, and I'm sure you'll be able to help us understand this, the Congress has lined up to give them $250 million.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with the security of this country.
No.
It has to do with your neighbors that you used to have up near Washington, you know, those military-industrial complex people, because the money just goes over to their bank account, and they get rid of probably some junk that they didn't want, and they get some credit. So anyway, that's still around. The problem of foreign aid is going to last for a long time. But nobody knows what will come, and I know the other problems are going to exist for a while because coronavirus isn't going to go away overnight. Maybe the truth will come out someday on how threatening it is and how serious it is, as well as you know, the financial bubble bursting, the stock market. That is going to be tougher because people aren't conditioned to understanding the business cycle. So we have a long way to go there to explain to the people exactly why a certain group of people in this country, certain types of economists, knew about it, knew that as the bubble was building and knew it would burst. And quite frankly, I don't think it had anything to do with coronavirus. It may have been lighting the fire or something, but the bubble, people should ask, why was there a bubble, and what was it related to, or does the concern over coronavirus create the bubble? No, the bubble's been there, and it was looking for an excuse to collapse, and I think that's going to be around for a while, but the full explanation and understanding, unfortunately, we have a way to go before the people understand that.
Well, you know who else is looking for an excuse? It's always the masters of the universe. You know, I'm sure you saw this article linked on the top of the Drudge Report. IMF chief economist urges targeted policies to stem the economic harm of the coronaviruses. They love to concentrate power when there's a crisis like this. And this chief economist, Geeta Gopinath, says that we need to have more cash transfers, wage subsidies. Central banks should be prepared to provide liquidity. Got to do it, you know.
Well, isn't that what the Fed's been doing for a long time, ever since 1913, you know, in some way? So, no, that's a mess for sure. But this $125 million worth of weaponry going to Ukraine, and it has to do with some radar, and it has also to do with vessels that travel in shallow water, and it can very well involve Russia. Matter of fact, it does, because the Ukrainians are sort of split. Half of them like Russia, half of them hate Russia. But there's a Sea of Azov that is nearby there, and there's been a bit of a skirmish over there. But these vessels specifically would deal with the Sea of Azov, because that's where the conflict with Russia occurred, and I think that's related.
Yeah, and actually we have a map that we can even bring up to show what we're talking about. But here's the Kerch Strait, and that's actually where the incident occurred in November 2018. Ukraine sent 2 gunboats and a tugboat, and kind of a provocation. It was just a few months after the Russians completed the bridge over the strait, which connected Crimea with mainland Russia. As we remember, Crimea was savagely stripped from Ukraine by the evil Putin after the U.S. coup. But more seriously, so there was this incident. The Russians did stop the Ukrainians from going under there. And Poroshenko, who was president at the time, used the incident to impose martial law for 30 days. But what a lot of people speculated, this was at the end of November. They are having elections in March of 2019. Poroshenko was incredibly unpopular. And so the speculation that he was trying to make himself look bigger than he was by imposing martial law and looking like he was going to take it. But the big question is now the transfer of these Mark 6 patrol boats over to Ukraine as part of this $125 million in free money. What kind of change in the calculus might that have, if there's another event? And might it embolden the Ukrainians to do another provocation?
But I think we can say with conviction that what we're doing there now, and this $250 million we're committed to add to what we've already given Ukraine, has nothing to do with our national security. And I see Ukraine has become very dependent. I guess they get foreign aid from other people too, but they say 90% of their foreign aid, which is probably a big hunk of their economy, comes from the United States. From the United States, who's that? Is that the Federal Reserve? No, eventually it's always from the people. They take the money, and this is why the socialists are so absurd in not understanding this, because no matter what it is, it's for free, not ever realizing that when you take it from people, whether it's direct taxation or whether it's through deficits financing or printing of money, it's a challenge to the middle class, and they're right when they're complaining about the middle class, but they're wrong in finding out what the explanation is. So this type of activity doesn't provide national security. It doesn't help the financial security of the people, and it really doesn't provide a move toward peace and prosperity. I would think if the Russians and the Ukrainians would have to sort that out, and might not satisfy everybody around the world, but that's the way they fought over that place. How long was the Russians and the Ukrainians doing it? Crimea has been more Russian than it has been Ukraine, over the history.
That is the big question. How does this money, this $125 million, $250 million, how does this make us safer? How does this help us? Yeah. What does it have to do with us, except for the elites? And let's don't forget Joe Biden standing up there saying, hey, I got $1 billion here, Poroshenko, but you got to fire that guy who is investigating my son, or you don't get this $1 billion. I mean, do you think Americans, when they were watching him give away our $1 billion, were saying, oh, that's great. We're so happy. We're going to be so much safer now.
See, I don't think we'll be able to ever know the absolute truth, the motivations of Trump and everybody else on this. But they should understand that this type of activity, passing out taxpayers' money and picking sides, is always political. Yeah. And one of the conditions that Trump, mentioned, of course, that was part of his defense, is that the law says you don't send the money if there's corruption. I keep thinking that Trump probably if he had been more upfront, probably says, say, you know, there is corruption there, and I'm not going to give it to him. But, you know, he doesn't back down very much. But on this one, he backed down, and they quickly sent the money because the heat was on and the impeachment process was occurring. But it's a real shame. But the problem and the argument whether it's legitimate or political or quid pro quo is secondary to this principle we just talked about, and the principle of stealing from the American people and passing out money to benefit the military-industrial complex and the deep state. Yeah. That's where the real problem is.
And look, we should again mention this whole thing goes back really essentially to late 2013, early 2014, when the Obama administration got the bright idea, hey, let's do a coup in Ukraine. What could go wrong, you know? But here you talk about corruption. Here's an example of corruption. It would have given all the justification Trump needed to withhold the money. Remember back in September of 2019, the U.S. sent a couple of old Coast Guard cutters to Ukraine. And that was hailed as, you know, a sign of support after this provocation in Kerch. But the plans to send those Coast Guard ships to Ukraine, that wasn't Trump's idea. That was launched in 2014 under Obama to give him these ships. And this was Trump, again, just continuing Obama's policy. But so why would it take him 4 years to get these ships? Well, one of the reasons is that Ukraine had its own shipbuilding company, and they didn't want free American ships because they wanted a contract to build those ships. Well, it was the only ship company in Ukraine, and guess who owned it? Poroshenko, the president himself. The president himself owned the only shipbuilding. He said, I don't want your free ships.
That's building American tradition.
Yeah, you know? Exactly. So, you know, and the big backer of this ship transfer, by the way, was the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, who made an appearance at the impeachment hearing saying, Trump went against the interagency. Trump went against the interagency. So, you know, corruption is spread widely, I think, on this deal.
Did anybody ever remind her about the executive branch of government and the president? But overall, you know, these things can always go back to the type of foreign policy we have. You immediately were able to take this and link it back to Obama, just like Syria. You know, it's time for Assad to go. So it's a linkage, it's a continuation of, it's a foreign policy that I claim has been bipartisan for a long time because they capitulate to the deep state that have a lot of special interests, and it never seemed to change. There's demagoguing, and they'll try to get a political benefit from it. And yet, when the dust settles, it's the same old stuff that we've been putting up with for a long time. You know, I think at the beginning we sort of talked about the problems financially going on now, and also this incident. And I think, well, you know, one of these days, and I've said this many times, one of these days we're just going to run out of money, and maybe we are reaching that point. I mean, right now the only thing that anybody wants is a 10-year Treasury bill. And now it's like 0.7% they're paying. It's negative interest rates. And there's so many dollars, they're just finding, what do we do with it? You know, you can't find a box to put them in. You don't have bills, and you don't buy stocks anymore. We pumped up the stock market and it crashed. So right now it's government securities. And they think, well, we think our government is insecure. I mean, we have deficits of, $22 trillion. And what do? Print more money and run up the deficit higher, spend more money, and that will solve the problem. And just now, like what you pointed out, the international bodies are doing this too. And all governments, I think our central banks work hand in glove with other central banks, but we're just more powerful, and we're able to get away with it a lot longer. But the dollar has remained relatively strong, except it's been weaker than it had been for a long time. It has weakened, so that's a sign of things breaking down. And the fireworks haven't finished yet. And I hope we don't have fireworks as a distraction from this, because once the troops are being fired on and the troops are killed, there's no there's no chance then to come up with a logical discourse. People will just say, "Oh, you're un-American if you're not ready to go to war. It's Russia. Let's go get Russians," that sort of thing.
You talk about fireworks. It makes you wonder whether there might be just some small precipitating event that leads the whole house of cards to fall. And before we went on air, we were both talking about Tom Luongo had a good piece on LewRockwell.com, where he talked about the implications of Russia saying no. And in this context, it was saying no over trying to artificially prop up the oil prices, with the Saudis, with the OPEC, but also with the U.S. And Tom makes a good point that the Russians are able to extract oil for about $20 a barrel. The Americans can't do it for anywhere near that. So this depressed oil going down from the 70s now to the 40s, and who knows what the bottom is on that, by the Russians not agreeing to artificially prop it up, this may be the precipitating event. Who knows?
I always argued, and I was always challenged by it too, because as much as I like technology, and I think it's good that we know how to do fracking, there should be consideration for the environment and all these things. But I always believe this was excessive because there is financing. Unlimited finances at lower than market rate, and people went and invested in this. And you make the perfect point, because if it's a world market, which it should be, that the Russians, if we could treat people decently and get along on these trades, the Russians would sell us oil. They were anxious after, after the Soviet system disappeared. They wanted to trade and do things. So that's where the oil should be coming from. And all of a sudden, fracking is losing its shirt right now. It's going down sharply, and we can't compete with it. And Putin's now looks like he's getting more economic power and authority over the oil industry anyway.
And they have no debt and tons of gold. So anyway, if we're ready to close out, I'll just start with my weekly reminder, and we'll do some announcements of speakers in the course of the week. But just to get your tickets for the Ron Paul Institute May conference in Houston, lots to talk about. The focus is going to be on the war on speech, but we'll touch on things like social media. What should we do about the big social media companies in bed with governments? So there will be plenty of talk about, plenty of guests. RonPaulInstitute.org/conference. More info and tickets.
Very good. Hopefully we have a good turnout like we always do.
Good so far. Good so far.
It's going to be a good and interesting meeting that we'll have. But I do want to thank all our viewers for once again tuning in. We are doing well. Our numbers are growing. We're having more subscribers than before. And we always feel subtly threatened by the individuals cutting us off. And yet I think the internet is too big to be destroyed, and we make good use of it. But there will also be limitations. And as long as we're able to get this program done and get it out to you, we're going to do it. And I think that will last, even though there might be some spots that will be rough and tumble. But when the international politicians get involved and the cultural Marxists get involved in defining and enforcing the First Amendment, we can be in trouble. It can be pretty horrible. But I think that today on our little review of what's going on in Ukraine is important, because it is a distraction. It represents just another example, and a typical example of how we run our foreign policy, never helping the American people, hurting the American people. We pay for it. We lose our civil liberties because we're involved. And just think of what's happened in this century. It's been downhill for the protection of liberty. And that is the reason we have to keep talking about, the First Amendment, a freedom to express ourselves, also a foreign policy which keeps us out of trouble and mischief, and emphasize more, trading with people. And that hasn't been done so well in this last several years. It's always threats and intimidation, and who knows what. But I think that it's available to us, and maybe out of necessity it will change. And what we want to do is work on the change for the better, not for the change to make it worse and just say, hey, things are terrible. What we need is a dictator that will give everybody whatever they want because it's free stuff. I mean, that has to be canceled out, that thought, because too many people buy into this. So anyway, I want to really thank you for the support you have given us. We appreciate that very much. And please return to the Liberty Report soon.